On a Tuesday, my brother made himself a hero to someone we'd never met. By Friday, our landlord wanted his rent. I'm 29, a library assistant in Columbus, Ohio, organized, list-driven, the kind of person who labels the spice rack. Tyler is 26 and allergic to silence. Every story he tells reaches for applause. In most families, there's a rescuer archetype, the person who wants to be the answer, the fixer, the big tipper. They're not greedy. They're hooked on impact. Give them an audience and they bloom. Take it away, and they search for one online. If you've ever watched a live stream, you've seen the theater built for people like that. The chat scrolls like confetti, the alert pings sound like arcade tickets, and the streamer says your name with that grateful lift. You're amazing, thank you. That isn't just thanks. It's a mirror polished just for you. Psychology-wise, it's textbook variable reward, unpredictable, personal, and public. You don't even need the money to mean anything. You just need the moment it buys. We've been saving for a new place, first and last month plus a security deposit, because our current apartment sat between a bar that never closed on time and a neighbor who ran a drum kit like a lawnmower. We kept the cash in a joint high-yield account, simple and transparent. He'd picked up extra shifts. I'd trimmed the grocery budget. It wasn't romantic, but it was adult. That night, Tyler hunched over his laptop on the couch, headphones on, eyes lit by a spinning wheel and a face in a ring light. He waved me off with a smile that said, "I'm busy doing good." Here's the dynamic no one admits. In public generosity, the donor story grows bigger than the gift. The rescuer archetype becomes the star, and the money is just wardrobe. Platforms know this. They dangle tiered badges, animated crowns, leaderboards that reset at midnight. If you're the type who wants to matter, it's a perfect storm. You don't notice how quickly support becomes. Prove it. My phone buzzed with a bank alert. Anything over 200 triggered a ping. Payment processed. $750. I frowned and swiped. Another ping. $1,250. You think it's a glitch, because the responsible part of your brain insists on sanity. Then the third alert hits. I open the app and watch the balance drain in neat, polite lines. Names and usernames flashed on his screen. Numbers vanished on mine. When he finally pulled off his headphones, the room felt very small. We had $187 left, and in 10 days, a deposit was due. Tyler didn't start with sorry. He started with purpose. It was for a goal, he said, like that word could hold the weight of numbers. You've seen this move. When a rescuer is cornered, they don't retreat, they widen the mission. Psychologically, it shifts the frame from impulse to meaning. The more you question them, the more their identity hardens around the act. He talked fast, matching donation tiers, time-limited multipliers, leaderboards that reset at midnight. In his mind, he hadn't spent money, he had secured standing. The stream was a subathon, which is basically an attention marathon dressed up as community. There was a wheel, milestones, and a list of top supporters pinned up like a digital church plaque. The streamer, Sunny May, was saving for a studio upgrade and a chunk for local shelters, which is the kind of hybrid cause that makes judgment feel mean. Rescuers adore that mix. It lets them be generous without looking naive, righteous without looking preachy. Drop a big donation and the screen does fireworks. Her voice says your name like you're not just seen, you're needed. If you've never felt important in a room, a chat can feel like oxygen. I asked about the deposit. The protector archetype sounds dull next to the rescuer, but it's what keeps lights on. He waved at his screen. She DM'd me, he said, showing a short message with a heart emoji and a VIP badge. Do not underestimate the power of access. For people like Tyler, backstage is currency. Once the platform confers a role, moderator, VIP, top donor, you're not spending money, you're defending a status. That's the sunk cost trap in social form. The more public the commitment, the more you rationalize staying in. Try pulling back, and you feel lost twice. Cash and face. I suggested calling the bank. Digital tips are gifts. The terms make that clear, and chargebacks don't just fail. They brand you a problem, sometimes publicly. He stiffened at the word refund. Rescuers experience reversal as accusation. If he asked for money back, he didn't help. If he didn't help, he isn't who he says he is. You, sitting at home, might think this is simple math. It isn't. It's identity math. He promised extra shifts, selling his gaming chair, a gear purge. Then he whispered the real plan. There's a giveaway next week. PC, cash prizes. I'm in good with the mods. I can win some back. That's variable reward disguising itself as hustle. Our landlord texted a reminder about the move-in timeline. 10 days. I started a list. Side gigs, things we could sell, relatives I least hated calling. Tyler's phone lit up with a new DM. You in for tonight's push? Need my VIPs. He looked at me like a firefighter eyeing two buildings. One was on the internet, the other was our life. He reached for his headphones. I opened my laptop and a blank spreadsheet. Spreadsheets don't lie. Columns don't care about dreams or dopamine. Rent was $1,050. Deposit, another $1,050. Utilities to set up, $300. Moving truck, $120. Add groceries, bus fare, all the things you never think about until they're gone. Even selling both our bikes wouldn't close the gap. That's the difference between the rescuer and the manager archetype. One seeks applause, the other measures scarcity. And scarcity doesn't clap. Tyler floated through the next few days in a strange rhythm. Nights, he was glued to the stream. Days, he went to work, then came home bragging about covering doubles. He promised to catch up. The irony? He wasn't lazy. He worked hard. But the rescuer's effort bends towards spotlight, not infrastructure. He could pull 16 hours, then give it away in 3 minutes of online fireworks. To him, that was balance. To me, it was sabotage. Here's what platforms engineer perfectly. Streaks. Break them, and you feel failure. Maintain them, and you feel loyalty. Sunny May's subathon extended as long as support flowed. It became a test of endurance, of devotion. Tyler's name glowed at the top of the leaderboard. His messages read aloud, his identity reinforced hourly. People in chat praised him like he was saving the whole event. For a rescuer, that's intoxicating. For the sibling managing rent, it was like watching someone drink water laced with sand. I tried a different angle. I asked if he'd noticed the chatters who dropped $5 here, $10 there. Those people could walk away. They weren't addicted. He shook his head. They don't have my bond with her, he said. Bond is the rescuer's shield. Challenge it, and you challenge their self-worth. The truth? Most of those messages vanish. Streamers smile and move on. The donor remembers for days. The audience forgets in seconds. That asymmetry is the fuel. By the 5th day, he wasn't just behind on shifts. He was trading them, claiming he needed flex time to pursue side hustles. In reality, he was entering giveaways, posting in Discord servers, chasing recognition like a job that never paid. Meanwhile, our landlord scheduled a walkthrough of the new place. I printed the checklist: paint scuffs, light bulbs, outlet covers, all routine. Except, I couldn't check off the most important line: funds cleared. Tyler came home that night with a bag of takeout, acting generous, as if dinner made up for the missing thousands. He set it on the table, gritting. You'll see, he said. This is all going to pay off. And that's when I noticed his wrist, wrapped in a neon wristband, the kind streamers mail to their VIPs. He wore it like a medal. That wristband summed up the trap. Tangible proof, cheap to produce, priceless to the recipient. It's the same psychology behind marathon medals or donor bricks outside a museum. The rescuer archetype doesn't just want to give. They want something to hold, to prove they gave. For Tyler, that neon band was more than plastic. It was identity in physical form. He twisted it around his wrist like it anchored him to meaning. I didn't want to fight over symbols, so I asked practical questions. Had he actually saved anything from his doubles? Did he plan to transfer funds into our account? Was there any chance he'd spoken to HR about overtime? He sidestepped each one with vague optimism. Rescuers rely on future tense. Next check will be bigger. Next giveaway I'll score. The trouble is, bills don't live in the future. They live in dates and balances. Meanwhile, I started scanning alternatives. Could we stay at our current unit? The lease was ending. The landlord already promised it to a new tenant. Could we crash with relatives? My parents lived 2 states away in Kentucky, and Tyler refused to admit to them what he'd done. Friends had space, but not enough for 2 adults. Every path circled back to the same wall. We needed cash, not promises. Tyler's behavior grew more erratic the closer we got to the deadline. He called me a pessimist when I warned him about eviction timelines. He accused me of not believing in him. That's another rescuer defense, turned doubt into betrayal. In their logic, skepticism is sabotage. The deeper they're in, the more they cling to the narrative that only they can fix it. Break that illusion, and you're not just a critic, you're the enemy. On the 7th day, our landlord left a voicemail. Calm, professional, but clear. If we didn't bring the deposit within 72 hours, the place would go to someone else. No wiggle, no negotiation. I replayed it 3 times, letting the certainty sink in. Then I walked into the living room. Tyler was on the couch, the streamer's voice pouring from his laptop. She was thanking her top guardian angel for another donation. His username glowed on screen. He looked proud, radiant even. And I realized he thought he was winning. That night I barely slept. My mind kept running the math against the clock. 72 hours wasn't a window, it was a guillotine. At work the next day, I shelved books like a robot, but inside I was tallying Craigslist sales, calculating how long it would take to cash out my tiny retirement fund, wondering if I could beg for an advance from my boss. Stress makes you resourceful, but it also makes you reckless. I knew I couldn't cover both of us alone, but I also knew Tyler wouldn't stop himself. Psychologists call it escalation of commitment. Once someone invests too much time, money, or identity, they double down to justify it. That's exactly what Tyler was doing. The more he gave, the more he insisted the streamer needed him. The more he insisted, the harder it became to admit it was out of control. If you've ever tried to pull someone out of quicksand while they're convinced it's a swimming pool, you know the futility. I finally sat him down at the kitchen table. No distractions, no background noise. I put my phone between us and played the landlord's voicemail. His smile faltered, but he recovered quickly, pointing at the band on his wrist like it was a shield. "I'll win the giveaway," he repeated, voice steady, eyes stubborn. It wasn't defiance, it was faith. That's what made it dangerous. Faith can't be argued with spreadsheets. To snap him out of it, I told him the blunt truth. If the money didn't show, I'd leave him behind. Not forever, but for the sake of survival. A friend had already offered me their couch. I hated saying it, but I needed him to feel the real consequence. Sometimes the only thing that pierces the rescuer's armor is abandonment. You either join reality, or you face it alone. His jaw tightened. He muttered something about loyalty, and how I was supposed to believe in him. But underneath the defensiveness, I saw fear. Not of losing the apartment, that didn't register yet, but of losing the audience closest to him. Recognition online was intoxicating, but recognition at home was grounding. For the first time, he looked small in his chair, like the wristband wasn't a medal but a cuff. 2 days remained, and when I checked our account that night, I saw a new deposit, $240 from his overtime. A gesture, not a solution, but at least it was something. That $240 might have seemed like a win to Tyler, but to me, it was proof he didn't grasp the scale of the problem. It was like tossing a bucket of water on a house fire. Still, he strutted around like he'd covered his share. Rescuers mistake symbolic effort for structural repair. He was proud of that one deposit, ignoring the thousands gone. Meanwhile, I stared at the landlord's deadline circled on my calendar. 48 hours. I went into overdrive. I listed our old bikes, some shelves, even my record player on Facebook Marketplace. A woman bought the player for $150 in cash, and for a moment, I felt like maybe this patchwork plan could hold. But I knew I couldn't scavenge $1,000 in 2 days unless I took a drastic step. That night, I opened my tiny Roth IRA. Cashing it out would mean penalties, but penalties didn't matter if we didn't have a roof. It felt like betraying my future self to save the present. Tyler noticed the forms on my laptop. "You don't have to do that," he said, with this odd mix of guilt and superiority. "I told you, I've got it." He was clutching his phone, eyes darting between Discord messages. I asked what having it looked like. He admitted he was pooling entries with other VIPs for the streamer's big raffle, cash cards, electronics, even rent money prizes. He framed it as teamwork, as if gambling in a digital carnival was strategy. Here's what rescuers don't see. When they fuse their identity with a cause, the actual outcome becomes secondary. Winning the giveaway wasn't about paying bills. It was about proving his faith right. If he lost, it wasn't just money, it was his self-image collapsing. That's why he couldn't quit, not even for survival. To him, quitting meant being ordinary. I told him flatly, if the money wasn't there by Friday, I was signing the IRA paperwork and moving without him. He froze. I could see the fight in his eyes, but also the crack. Rescuers hate ultimatums, because it forces them to choose between the fantasy and the relationship. He didn't argue this time. He just slipped his headphones on and disappeared into the glow of his laptop. I went to bed with the sound of her voice muffled through his door, upbeat and grateful, thanking donors like he was oxygen to her stream. My phone buzzed with a message from the landlord. Reminder, payment due in 36 hours. Confirming either way. The clock wasn't moving slowly anymore. It was sprinting. By the next morning, I'd made my decision. I printed the IRA withdrawal forms, signed them, and sealed them in an envelope. It wasn't courage. It was survival. But I held off mailing it, hoping against reason that Tyler might come through. That's the paradox of living with a rescuer. Even when they drain you, some part of you still wants to believe in their big moment. At work, I couldn't focus. Every book spine blurred. When I checked my phone at lunch, there was a string of texts from Tyler, screenshots of the streamer's Discord, hype about the grand finale giveaway. He'd written, "This is it. Tonight changes everything." That was rescuer language distilled. The promise of transformation, always just one act away. I left early and walked into the apartment to find him pacing. His laptop blared the countdown overlay, confetti graphics, chat exploding, Sunny May thanking heroes as donations climbed. Tyler's username sat at the very top, a glowing badge beside it. He had doubled down again, this time with the last of his paycheck. My stomach dropped. The rescuer can't resist the final push. The idea of stepping back at the climax feels like betrayal to their own story. The giveaway started. Random draws, spinning wheels, flashing lights, gift cards, consoles, headphones, other names pulled, cheers erupting. Tyler leaned forward like a man in a horse race. When a $500 rent voucher appeared on the wheel, his knuckles went white. The wheel spun, slowed, skipped his username, and landed on someone else. He cursed, then forced a laugh, pretending it didn't matter. Minutes later, the grand prize, a $2,000 payout, rolled across the screen. His name flashed once, then disappeared. Another user claimed it. The streamer cheered, the chat flooded with emojis, and Tyler sat back hollow. Here's what broke me. He didn't look angry. He looked relieved, like the chase was over and the weight slipped off his shoulders. Rescuers often burn themselves out chasing validation, and when it collapses, there's almost a strange calm. But reality doesn't pause. My phone buzzed again. Landlord, 24 hours left. I showed him the message. "This is it," I said. He nodded, quiet for once. Then he unclipped the neon wristband, set it on the table, and pushed it toward me like an apology. But an apology doesn't cover rent. I went to bed staring at that cheap band, knowing in less than a day I had to decide, mail the envelope or walk away. Morning sunlight didn't bring clarity, it just exposed the mess. The envelope with my IRA form sat on the counter. The wristband sat beside it. Two symbols, my future shrinking, his fantasy broken. Tyler shuffled out of his room, eyes red, shoulders slumped. He didn't launch into excuses or promises this time. Instead, he muttered, "I screwed us." That was the first real ownership he'd taken, but ownership doesn't pay a landlord. Here's the psychology of collapse. When the rescuer finally admits failure, the identity they built around saving others implodes. Some spiral into shame, some redirect to a new crusade. Tyler seemed stuck in limbo, drifting without a role. For once, I didn't lecture. I slid the envelope into my backpack and said, "I'll handle it." The protector archetype doesn't win applause, but it does keep a roof overhead. At work, I slipped away on break and mailed the forms. The act felt both humiliating and freeing. Humiliating because I had sacrificed years of slow, careful saving to cover a disaster I didn't cause. Freeing because, for the first time in weeks, there was certainty. Money would hit my account in 2 days. It would be late, but maybe, just maybe, I could convince the landlord to hold off. That night, Tyler surprised me. He came home not with takeout or hype, but with a stack of boxes. Old sneakers, games, collectibles, things he once guarded like treasure. "I listed it all," he said, his voice cracked. It wasn't grand. It wasn't heroic, but it was concrete. Rescuers rarely pivot to humility without a crash. This was his. We packed side by side in silence, taping boxes that might never leave the apartment if money didn't arrive. The landlord's deadline loomed less than 12 hours away. Tyler kept glancing at the wristband on the counter. Finally, he picked it up and tossed it into the trash. A small gesture, but sometimes the smallest gestures mark a real shift. Still, when I lay down that night, exhaustion pressing heavy, one thought haunted me. What if the landlord refused to wait, even for 2 days? Then all of this, the mailing, the selling, the apologies, would just be rearranging chairs on a sinking boat. The next morning, I called our landlord before work. My voice was steady, but inside I braced for rejection. I explained the withdrawal, the 2-day delay, promised the full deposit plus first month's rent by Monday. There was a pause long enough to feel like a verdict. Finally, he sighed and said, "I'll give you until end of business Monday. No later." Relief hit me hard enough that I had to sit down. It wasn't victory. It was borrowed time, but it meant we weren't homeless tomorrow. When I told Tyler, he looked like someone given a stay of execution. He mumbled thanks, then went back to photographing his sneakers for listings. That's the thing about a rescuer after collapse. They swing between shame and sudden productivity. It's a strange mix. 1 minute silent, the next rattling off ideas to fix everything. I let him talk, but I kept my eyes on the spreadsheet. Action mattered more than intention now. By Sunday evening, a trickle of sales added a few hundred to our total. It wasn't enough on its own, but combined with my withdrawal, we would scrape by. Tyler worked a double shift that day, the first without skipping. He came home drained, but for once, he didn't turn on the stream. He dropped his tips on the table and just said, "At it." That moment felt bigger than any donation alert he'd ever triggered. Here's what most people don't see. Rescuers crave recognition, but when stripped of it, they sometimes find something sturdier, contribution without spectacle. It's quieter, less glamorous, but more durable. Whether Tyler could sustain it, I didn't know. But in that weekend, he glimpsed the difference between applause and stability. Monday morning, I stood in the bank line with a cashier's check clutched tight. The number printed across it wasn't comfortable, but it was survival. I handed it over to the landlord that afternoon. He nodded, gave me the keys, and left. No fireworks, no confetti, no applause. Just a signed lease and a roof secured. When I walked back to the apartment, Tyler was sitting on the couch, scrolling aimlessly. He looked up, searching my face for the outcome. I held up the keys. His shoulders dropped in relief, and for once, he didn't try to make it about him. He just said, "Thanks for not giving up." I didn't answer right away, because deep down, I knew the real test wasn't saving the apartment. It was whether he could stop needing to be a hero everywhere but home. Moving day came with sore backs, cheap pizza, and a sense of reset. The new place wasn't glamorous, peeling linoleum, outdated appliances, but it was quiet, and the lease had my name on it. Signing had been both empowering and sobering. I'd carried us through, but at the cost of my future savings. That's the burden of the protector archetype. You hold a net, and when someone else falls, you fall with them just far enough to break their landing. Tyler hauled boxes without complaint. He didn't joke or narrate his effort like usual. He just worked, sweating in silence. That silence was new. Rescuers thrive on recognition, but here there was no audience. Maybe the absence gave him space to see himself differently. Later, when we sat on the floor with greasy paper plates, he said, almost shy, "I'm done with streams. I deleted the apps." He didn't look at me, as if afraid I'd doubt him. I didn't press. Promises are cheap. Patterns are the proof. In the weeks that followed, I watched him carefully. He still twitched toward his phone, still got restless in the quiet, but he poured more hours into work, even picked up a side gig delivering groceries. The money trickled in, steady and real. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was different. Instead of fireworks on a screen, he stacked bills in an envelope labeled savings. Small steps, quiet ones. Psychologically, it was the beginning of individuation, the rescuer separating his worth from applause. Not everyone makes that shift. Some spend their whole lives chasing recognition, bleeding themselves dry for cheers that vanish the second the show ends. Tyler tasted that collapse, and for once, he didn't run back to the stage. For me, the lesson wasn't about trust or betrayal. It was about recognizing the archetypes we live by. Some of us protect, some of us rescue, some of us manage or consume. The trick is knowing when the role stops serving the life you're trying to build. I'll never get back the money I lost from that IRA. But we got a roof, and maybe Tyler got something harder to measure: perspective. Sometimes survival isn't noble. Sometimes it's just a key in your hand, a roof over your head, and the quiet hope that the people closest to you will finally stop needing the world to clap.